1967, a steelworker's wife in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, could feed a family of 7 for less than 60 cents a day. Today, that same family would spend over $90 on groceries, and half of it would end up in the trash within a week. Number 14 involved an organ meat so cheap that butchers gave it away for free, but it delivered more iron than anything you can buy at Whole Foods today. Number 7 used a fermentation method that food scientists only validated in 2019, 70 years after grandmothers stopped using it. Hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to learn in the next 18 minutes could save you thousands of dollars a year and might explain why your great-grandmother lived to 95 on food we now call poverty smalsuls. Let's count down the 20 Depression-era dishes that were too smart to survive. Number 20, dandelion greens with bacon drippings. This was not foraged food or a farmer's market delicacy. This was what you ate in April, when the root cellar was empty and payday was 4 days away. In the mill towns of Pennsylvania, women sent children into yards with paper sacks to pick dandelion leaves before they flowered and turned bitter. They wilted the greens in hot bacon fat, added vinegar, and served them while the fat was still popping. The iron in the leaves was exactly what men needed after 10-hour shifts breathing coal dust. It cost nothing because dandelions grew everywhere. Today, organic dandelion greens sell for $12 a pound at specialty grocers. Your great-grandmother just called it April. Number 19, milk toast. This was the food doctors prescribed before antibiotics existed, before IV fluids. When a child was too sick to eat, mothers made milk toast. They heated milk until it steamed, toasted bread until golden, tore it into pieces, and let it soak until it turned soft as pudding. It stayed down when nothing else would. In 1935, a quart of milk cost 14 cents and a loaf of bread cost 8 cents. You could keep a sick child alive for days on 30 cents. The pediatrician would tell the mother to make milk toast every 2 hours until the fever broke. It was medicine that tasted like comfort. Number 18, fried cornmeal mush. In the coal towns of Appalachia, this was breakfast for 3 days straight. Women boiled cornmeal into thick porridge at night, poured it into loaf pans, and set it in the icebox to firm up. By morning, it had solidified into something you could slice. They fried the slices in saved bacon fat until the outside turned golden and developed a crust. The inside stayed creamy and dense. Men ate it with molasses or just salt. A 5-pound sack of cornmeal cost 19 cents in 1936 and made enough fried mush to feed a family breakfast for a week. The smell of it cooking, sweet corn and hot fat, filled entire neighborhoods on winter mornings, mixing with coal smoke and shift whistles. Number 17, potato soup with bacon ends. Butchers sold bacon ends for almost nothing because they were irregular pieces that could not be sliced uniformly. In 1938, a pound cost 7 cents. Women used them to flavor an entire pot of soup that would feed a family for 2 days. They diced the bacon ends and rendered them until the fat ran clear. Then they added diced potatoes, onions, water, salt, and pepper. The bacon fat coated every piece of potato. Sometimes they added milk at the end to make it creamy. A pot of this soup cost maybe 25 cents and delivered enough calories to get a family through the hardest part of winter. One woman from Wheeling remembered they never called it poor food. They called it smart food. Only city people looked down on it. Number 16, lima beans with ham hock. A ham hock in 1934 cost 12 cents. A pound of dried lima beans cost 8 cents. Together they made a pot of food that could feed 6 people for 2 meals. The ham hock was bone, skin, and a little flesh when you simmered it for hours. The collagen melted into the cooking water and turned it thick. The meat fell off the bone and shredded into the beans. What remained was a pot of creamy beans in a broth so rich it could stand a spoon upright. Women in tobacco country and textile mills made this every week. They served it with cornbread to soak up the liquid. The beans delivered protein. The ham bone delivered collagen that supports joint health and gut function. Nobody knew the science then. They just knew it worked. Number 15, cream chipped beef on toast. This was a way to make a quarter pound of beef feed 6 people. Chipped beef came dried and salted in jars and lasted forever. You soaked it to remove salt, then shredded it. In a pan, you made white sauce with butter, flour, and milk, cooking it until it thickened. You stirred in the beef and poured it over toast. In 1939, a jar of chipped beef cost 18 cents. Milk was 14 cents. Flour was 4 cents a pound, for less than 40 cents. A mother could make breakfast that filled stomachs through a long day of work. Factory workers in Detroit and Cleveland ate this before dawn shifts. Number 14, beef liver and onions. Liver was so cheap that butchers practically gave it away. In 1936, beef liver cost 5 cents a pound. People hated it then for the same reason people hate it now. The metallic taste. But it was the single most nutritious food available. One serving delivered more iron than a week of anything else, more vitamin A than carrots, more B vitamins than anything on the shelf. Women sliced it thin, soaked it in milk to mellow the flavor, dredged it in flour, and fried it fast. They smothered it in caramelized onions. The onions cut the mineral taste. Men who worked in steel mills and coal mines needed the iron. They ate liver once a week, whether they liked it or not. Number 13, navy beans with salt pork. This was the foundation of American working-class cooking for 100 years. A pound of dried navy beans cost 8 cents in 1937. A quarter pound of salt pork cost 10 cents. Together, they made a pot of food that could sustain a family through days of labor. You soaked the beans overnight, then simmered them for hours with salt pork until the beans turned creamy. The pork fat melted into the cooking liquid. You did not need to add anything else. This was the food of loggers, fishermen, railroad workers, and sharecroppers. It required no refrigeration, no expensive ingredients, no complicated technique. The beans delivered protein and fiber. The pork delivered fat and flavor. Together, they kept millions alive through the hardest years this country has seen. Something changed in American kitchens between 1955 and 1972. Food companies spent billions convincing mothers that cooking from scratch was a burden they no longer had to carry. Campbell's ran ads showing well-dressed suburban women opening cans while their neighbors stood at hot stoves looking tired. General Foods positioned convenience as sophistication and homemade as embarrassment. The USDA revised guidelines to favor foods that could be mass-produced and shipped long distances. Instant mashed potatoes replaced real ones. Canned vegetables replaced fresh. Cake mixes replaced recipes passed from mother to daughter. Modern women use shortcuts. Smart women buy prepared foods. Within a single generation, knowledge that had kept families fed through depressions and wars disappeared, not because it stopped working, but because corporations needed to sell more boxes. Number 12. Scrapple. This was the food of Pennsylvania Dutch country. When you butchered a hog, you used every part. And scrapple was made from everything left after the hams and bacon were cut. The head, the organs, the scraps too small to use otherwise. You boiled it all until the meat fell off the bones, picked through it, and shredded everything edible. You mixed it with cornmeal and buckwheat flour, seasoned it with sage and pepper, poured it into loaf pans, and let it set overnight. The next morning you sliced it and fried it until both sides were crispy. A single hog butchering produced enough scrapple to feed a family breakfast for 2 months. It cost nothing because it was made from parts that had no other use. Number 11. Bread pudding from stale bread. Nothing got thrown away, and bread was too expensive to waste. When it went stale, women saved it until they had enough to make pudding. They tore the bread into chunks, soaked it in milk with a little sugar and an egg if they had one, and baked it until it puffed up and turned golden on top. If there was jam or raisins in the cupboard, they went in too. Otherwise, just bread, milk, and sugar. In 1935, day-old bread sold for 3 cents a loaf. A quart of milk was 14 cents. 1 egg was 2 cents. For less than 20 cents, a mother could make a dessert that felt like a celebration. Children did not know it was thrift food. They just knew it was sweet and made the house smell like a bakery. Number 10. Pickled eggs. In spring, when chickens started laying again after winter, eggs were plentiful and cheap. A dozen might cost 15 cents in April. Women bought extra and pickled them in vinegar brine so they would last through summer without refrigeration. They hard-boiled the eggs, peeled them, and packed them into jars with vinegar, salt, and spices. The vinegar preserved them for months. You could pull one out in July and it tasted sharp and tangy. Factory workers carried pickled eggs in lunch pails. Farmers ate them in the field. They cost almost nothing to make and delivered protein that did not spoil in the heat. In coal mining camps, you could walk into any household and find a gallon jar of pickled eggs sitting on a shelf. They were insurance against hunger. Number 9. Oxtail soup. Oxtail was another cut that butchers gave away. In 1938, oxtail cost 8 cents a pound. It was bone, cartilage, and a little meat. When you simmered it for hours, it gave up collagen and marrow that turned water into a broth so thick it gelatinized when it cooled. Women browned the oxtail pieces first, then covered them with water, added whatever vegetables they had, and let the pot simmer all day. The meat fell off the bones. What you ended up with was a soup that tasted expensive but cost maybe 30 cents and fed a family for 2 days. Doctors told people to feed oxtail soup to anyone recovering from illness, though they could not explain why it worked. In 2017, researchers finally confirmed what grandmothers already knew. The glycine and proline in bone broth support immune function and tissue repair. Number 8. Fried green tomatoes, at the end of the growing season, before the first frost. Tomato plants were loaded with green fruit that would never ripen. You could let them freeze and lose them, or turn them into food. Women sliced the green tomatoes thick, dredged them in cornmeal mixed with flour and salt, and fried them in hot fat until the coating turned golden. The tomatoes stayed firm and tart inside in the rural South. Fried green tomatoes were a way to extend the harvest and waste nothing. A single plant might give you 2 dozen green tomatoes in October. That was 2 or 3 meals of free food, pulled from the garden when money was tightest. The cornmeal cost 4 cents a pound. The fat was saved from other cooking. The tomatoes cost nothing. Number 7. Sauerkraut made at home before refrigeration was common. Fermentation was the only way to preserve vegetables through winter. In late fall, when cabbage was selling for 2 cents a pound, women bought it by the bushel and made sauerkraut in 5-gallon crocks. They shredded the cabbage, salted it heavily, packed it down until liquid rose above the surface, and weighted it. Then they waited. The salt prevented bad bacteria while allowing good bacteria to ferment the cabbage. In 3 weeks, the cabbage transformed into something sour and crunchy. It lasted all winter and delivered vitamin C that prevented scurvy when fresh vegetables were gone. Polish, German, and Scandinavian families in Milwaukee and Chicago made sauerkraut every autumn as a matter of survival. Nobody knew the science of fermentation or probiotics. They just knew families who ate sauerkraut stayed healthier. The thing about these meals is that the science was right all along. In 2019, microbiologists at Cornell published research on lactofermentation, calling it a breakthrough in food preservation. Pennsylvania Dutch grandmothers had been doing it since the 1880s. In 2016, food scientists at UC Davis analyzed bone broth and found it superior to most commercial supplements for joint health. Then they checked the price. Bone broth now sells for $16 a quart at Whole Foods. It used to be free. Made from bones the butcher gave away. The wellness industry took Depression-era survival knowledge, repackaged it, and sold it back to us at a markup that would make your great-grandmother weep. We spent 70 years forgetting this knowledge. Then another 20 rediscovering it and paying premium prices for what used to be common sense. Number 6, cornbread and buttermilk. This was supper in the South when there was nothing else, and it was more common than anyone wants to remember. You baked a pan of cornbread in the afternoon using cornmeal, a little flour, salt, and buttermilk. No eggs if you did not have them. No sugar. Just the basics. By evening, the cornbread had cooled enough to handle. You crumbled it into a glass or a bowl, poured cold buttermilk over it until the bread soaked through and turned soft, and ate it with a spoon. The buttermilk was tangy and thick. The cornbread was slightly sweet from the corn itself. Together they made something that filled your stomach and cost almost nothing. In 1936, a pound of cornmeal was 4 cents. A quart of buttermilk, which was the liquid left over from churning butter and therefore nearly free on farms, sold for 8 cents in towns. A family could eat cornbread and buttermilk for supper and spend less than 15 cents. It was not cuisine, it was fuel. It kept children alive in sharecropper shacks across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia through years, when cotton prices collapsed and there was no money for anything that was not absolutely necessary. Ask your oldest relatives what their mothers cooked during hard times, not what they ate at holidays or celebrations. What they ate on Tuesdays in February when money ran out and payday was 4 days away. You might have 2 years left to record those answers. Maybe less. Every year, another million people who lived through the Depression die, and they take recipes with them that were never written down because everyone assumed someone would remember. But remembering requires asking, and asking requires understanding that what sounds like poverty food might actually be the smartest cooking anyone in your family ever did. The knowledge is disappearing faster than anyone realizes, not because people do not care, but because we stopped valuing the intelligence embedded in survival. Number 5, pinto beans and cornbread. This was the staple of Appalachian tables, Southern tables, Southwestern tables. Anywhere people worked hard and had almost nothing. A pound of dried pinto beans cost 7 cents in 1937. You soaked them overnight, then simmered them all day with a piece of salt pork or a ham bone, whatever you had. The beans turned creamy and broke down into a thick gravy. You served them with cornbread to soak up the liquid, and that was the meal. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner if times were truly desperate. The beans delivered protein and fiber. The cornbread delivered calories and made you feel full. Together, they provided enough nutrition to sustain people through physical labor, that would break most modern workers in half. Coal miners ate this, loggers ate this, cotton pickers ate this, railroad gangs ate this. It was boring, it was repetitive, but it kept you alive and cost less than anything else you could possibly eat. In mining camps and logging towns, the smell of pinto beans simmering was as common as the sound of work whistles and just as reliable. Number 4, salmon croquettes made from canned salmon. A can of salmon in 1935 cost 12 cents, and it was one of the few sources of affordable protein that did not require refrigeration. Women drained the can, picked through the salmon to remove bones and skin, though many left them in for the calcium, and mashed it with breadcrumbs, a little chopped onion if they had it, and an egg to bind it together. They formed the mixture into small patties and fried them in hot fat until both sides were golden and crispy. The outside crunched, the inside stayed moist and flaky. They tasted rich and satisfying, like something from a restaurant rather than a can. A 12-cent can of salmon could make 8 to 10 croquettes, enough to feed a family dinner. Served with boiled potatoes or cabbage, it was a complete meal for less than 25 cents. Factory families in Baltimore, Seattle, and San Francisco ate salmon croquettes every single week. The fish delivered protein and omega-3 fatty acids that supported brain function and heart health, though nobody knew to call it that then. They just knew it was good food that lasted and did not cost much. Number 3, apple butter made from windfalls. Orchards always had apples that fell before they were picked, bruised and battered from hitting the ground. Farmers sold them for almost nothing, sometimes a nickel for a bushel, because they could not be stored or shipped. Women bought them, cut away the bad spots, and cooked them down into apple butter. You did not need sugar if you cooked them long enough. The apples broke down and caramelized and turned dark and thick and sweet all on their own. It took hours of stirring, usually in a big pot outside over a fire. But the result was something you could spread on bread all winter long. It lasted for months without refrigeration because the concentrated sugars acted as a preservative. A bushel of windfall apples cost 5 cents and made enough apple butter to fill a dozen jars. Those jars represented breakfast for months, the difference between eating dry bread and eating something that felt like a treat. In rural Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia, making apple butter was an autumn ritual that entire communities participated in, everyone taking turns stirring, everyone getting jars to take home. Number 2, chicken feet soup. Butchers gave away chicken feet because there was no market for them. They were waste, something that got thrown out with the feathers and guts. But women who knew how to cook took them home and made soup that was almost magical in its richness. Chicken feet are mostly skin, tendons and tiny bones, all loaded with collagen. When you simmered them for hours, they gave up everything. The collagen melted into the water and turned it into a broth so thick it jiggled like jello when it cooled. You added vegetables, noodles, rice, whatever you had. And the result was a soup that felt nourishing in a way that went beyond flavor. It warmed you from the inside. It made you feel stronger. Doctors told mothers to make it for sick children, for elderly parents, for anyone who was weak or recovering. Chinese immigrants in San Francisco, Italian immigrants in New York, Jewish immigrants in Chicago, all of them knew about chicken feet soup and made it regularly. The feet cost nothing. The soup was medicine. In 2014, researchers at Harvard studied the compounds in chicken foot broth and found that it contained higher levels of collagen and glycosaminoglycans than any other type of stock, compounds that support joint health, skin elasticity, and immune function. Number 1, water gravy, just flour, lard, salt, and water. It sounds like nothing because it was nothing, the absolute bottom. The thing you made when there was nothing else in the house and payday was not until tomorrow. You melted a spoonful of lard in a pan, stirred in flour until it turned golden, then whisked in water and kept stirring until it thickened into a gravy. You poured it over biscuits or bread or potatoes. Anything that needed moisture and flavor, it was not good. It was barely food, but it kept children from going to bed hungry, and that was all that mattered. In the worst years of the Depression, in families where the father had lost his job and there was no money coming in, water gravy was the thing that prevented starvation. It meant nobody died. It meant you survived one more day until things got better. Women who made water gravy did not talk about it later. It was shameful, a marker of how bad things had gotten. But it was also proof of their resourcefulness, their refusal to give up, their determination to keep their families alive no matter what, and knowing it existed, knowing that you could make something from almost nothing, meant that giving up was never an option. These were not poor people's meals. These were smart people's meals during poor times. There is a difference. The women who cooked like this understood nutrition, chemistry, economics, seasonal availability, and preservation better than most modern chefs. They just did not get to put it on a menu or charge $40 a plate. They did not get recognition or awards. They got their families through the hardest years in American history. And then they were told to forget everything they knew because canned soup was more convenient. This week, make one meal from this list using ingredients that cost less than $5 total. See if you can feed your family for what your great-grandmother spent. Drop in the comments which one you will try, or which one your grandmother made that I missed. I want to hear your family's version of these meals, the ones that kept your people alive. The cost of forgetting this knowledge is measured in money we waste, health problems we accept as normal, and the loss of skills that sustained millions. The cost of remembering is just paying attention